Be the exception.
So I know that you might have been prodded by a friend to show up here, or you're sitting with your spouse, or maybe you're huddled in a conference room with your team. I know we've got people from all over the globe watching right now. So you might have no idea who the heck I am. So let me just explain very, very briefly. First of all, I am an entrepreneur. I have built, bought, and or turned around more than a dozen companies over the last 25 plus years. 22 years ago, one of those endeavors brought me into what's called the success media industry. And I helped build a television network called Success TV back in the mid-90s. This is where I met, got to know, and eventually be mentored by our dear late Jim Rohn, and then became friends with most every other thought leader you possibly can think of as we produced over 1,000 TV shows. I've also since then been at the center of the success media and human performance industry ever since. I've now led 3 of these different success-focused television networks, and many of you know I launched the rebirth of Success Magazine as publisher and editor almost a decade ago to what you see it as today. So these influential media platforms have given me unique, unlike anybody else of our lifetime, direct access to study, interview, and spend time with, and then present the stories of the most successful people on the planet. Amazing folks like the knighted Sir Richard Branson, or the late Steve Jobs, or Iron Man, Elon Musk, or the King Kong of e-commerce, Jeff Bezos, or the hooded billionaire, Mark Zuckerberg, and other folks like Starbucks, Howard Schultz, Steve Wynn, Jack Welch, tons more. So the only reason why any of this matters to you is this wild and willy 25-year journey puts me in a unique position to help be an exceptional guide for you. You see, I can condense, distill, and compress and package the best ideas, the best strategies and insights that can give you a huge advantage on your competition and help you achieve goals that you might even surprise yourself with, at least surprise your spouse and your kids. And I guess the one we always want to surprise is your banker. Let me tell you how this all came about. It's been a fascinating journey. A little while back, my wife and Georgia and I were entertaining good friends of ours that were visiting from Dallas, Texas at our other home in Miami Beach. So we're out taking a long walk on the beach together. It was another glorious day. The sky was bright blue. The warm sun was bathing us as we strolled down the white sands of South Beach, Miami. Meanwhile, it was like 40 degrees back at their home in Dallas. And so as we're walking along, my friend Robert was commenting on how wonderful our life is. And now that we have 2 amazing homes on both coasts, right? Miami Beach and San Diego. You know, it struck me at that moment. It's true. I mean, it is kind of a stark contrast to how life began for me, for sure. I mean, after all, I was born into a broken home. I was given up by my mother and basically grew up on what would be deemed the other side of the tracks from where I live these days. And while we were walking along and Robert was looking out at the teal blue ocean with the sun sparkling off the surface, he blurted out, "Man, this is really living," he said. "Your life has just skyrocketed the last few years." And this friend, Robert, has known me for 15 plus years. So he said, "You know, I always known that you've done well, but dude," and that's how he talks, "the last few years you've really blown up in profile and impact. What's the deal? What's happened?" he asked. "What's your secret?" So, you know, I had to think about it for a second, and he was right. Later, a few days later, after he and his wife left, I went back and I did the math, and literally in the last 4 years, my income multiplied 5 times, literally, on top of what was already a pretty big number. And more important than that metric is the more meaningful metric to me, and that is that my impact, my influence to be able to make a positive difference in people's lives multiplied many more times than just 5x the last 4 years during that same period. So while I was with Robert thinking about this question, I traced it back to a chance encounter that I had with a 94-year-old man at a party that I didn't even want to go to. It was purely chance. And then I told Robert the story of this encounter and the advice that this fascinating and wise man gave me. And so when I was done with the story, Robert said, actually insisted really, by continually grabbing my arm. You know, people who do that, they grab your arm every time they want your attention, and it seems to be like every 10 seconds. And he was saying, dude, you have to share this story in your work. And I told him, I have. They're all covered inside the Insane Productivity Training course that I've been delivering over the last few years. He says, yeah, but I've never heard the story of where this came from. The story itself is what makes it so clear and so impactful. You have to share the story, he kept insisting, for the rest of our walk, for the rest of his stay with us, and through perpetual texts and emails thereafter. He's been browbeating me. So, you know, Robert is definitely a persistent guy, to say the least. So that is what I'm doing now. I'm sharing this story and those few really game-changing secrets that this wise man shared with me that ever since then changed my productive future and, well, my lifestyle ever since. And so if this meeting that we're having here today benefits you, then you'll have Robert to thank for browbeating me into doing this. So here's what happened. I met this 94-year-old man through another friend of ours named Kevin. Kevin is the largest yacht broker in the world and a super awesome human being. So several years ago, he invited my wife Georgia and I to a private party that he was throwing at the boat show in Fort Lauderdale. And so if you're a yacht broker, the Fort Lauderdale Boat Show is your Super Bowl event, and Kevin is a guy that plays full out. So I've never been to the boat show and quite frankly had no particular interest in it either. It's really not my scene. But George and I really love Kevin and his wife, so we went in honor of them. Wow, let me just tell you, it's a sight to behold. It's as if you step into an altered universe. No kidding. I mean, the surplus, the wealth, the opulence is unbelievable, and it's massive. I mean, I thought there'd be a few boats kind of like parked up at the marina, like where we live near our home. This is an entirely different scene altogether. Again, not really my scene, but definitely something to behold. So George and I literally got lost in what seemed like an endless sea of $50 million yachts lined up one right after another. I mean, it's hard to describe. I mean, imagine the parking lot at your NFL's team's Coliseum. And let's say that you're just dropped off at the edge of the parking lot and you don't know where your friend is, and you just have to kind of figure it out by wandering around. But instead of cars and shirtless tailgaters, it's mega yachts and endless spreads of oysters, caviar, champagne that is being served in black tie. It's nuts. So just when you thought you were doing well, you come upon this scene and you're basically kind of grinded back down to size. So we finally did find the boat, if you can call it that, where Kevin is throwing his party. So we walk onto the boat, and George and I instantly see Kevin, and he comes up with big smiles and big hugs. He's definitely a charmer. And Kevin announces, I want to introduce you to the most interesting man I know. Now this is saying a lot because Kevin knows a lot of interesting characters, being in the business of selling mega yachts to the mega wealthy. So Kevin walks us up to a man that's sitting at a belly bar drinking a glass of white wine and says, Darren and Georgia, meet Conrad. Oh, call me Connie, the man says, extending his hand with a warm smile. He says, it's a pleasure to meet you both. Now, I too have met a lot of very interesting people in my life, but Kevin was right. Connie, as he calls himself, ended up not only being interesting, but the guy who would change my life and lifestyle that night forward. Connie was 94 years old when we met him, but had the energy and vibrancy of a man 50 years his junior. I mean, the life force and vitality just roared through his eyes. I mean, it was captivating just being in front of him. But he did have the wisdom of a man his age, who I came to find out later had amassed $1 billion plus personal fortune. I also found out later it was his 200-plus foot mega yacht that we were on. I only found out these details later from Kevin. You see, Conrad is one of the last old world gentlemen. Gracious, polite, soft-spoken, incredibly humble, and then keenly interested and fully focused on whoever he's talking with. Just witnessing and being around him was enlightening. So in talking with Connie, we learned that he did 5 European campaigns in World War II and commanded a tank that stormed Normandy. And Kevin later told us he also received a Purple Heart and several Bronze Stars for his war efforts. So getting him to discuss his success and vast business consortium was even harder to do. But I am a professional interviewer, and I can be relentless when I'm intrigued, and I was intrigued. So Connie came from humble beginnings. He started out with a small component manufacturing company that he started after the war in 1947, the year my dad was born. And he was really an accidental entrepreneur, as he only started the company to solve a problem for a machine repair shop that he was working for at the time. Well, that single component manufacturing company grew into what is now a consortium of more than 200 privately held operating and investment companies valued today at over $3 billion. And now, at the age of 94, I asked him the obvious question: what's he doing with his time these days? And he said he had recently had to step back into his operating company as chairman because his son, who is the CEO, nearly 70 years old himself, had made some critical and costly mistakes. So now, really curious, I asked, what kind of mistakes? And then he looked at me with fierce eyes and he said he lost focus. And his intensity and the way he said it, it actually startled me for a second. And then, with regret now in his voice, he followed that with, well, the sin is really mine, really. Why is that? I asked. And he said, I didn't teach him my sacred focus process. Now, really intrigued, naturally I asked, well, what's that? And then he got really animated, as if he saw an opportunity for redemption and penance. So he looked around for one of his crew and asked politely, would somebody please fetch me a piece of paper? And a piece of the yacht's stationery was quickly produced, and he flipped it over and he drew a big cross on it. And at the top, by the way, if you want to get the PDF that I sent you before the broadcast, you can follow along a little bit, and then I'll get you a clean version of it when we're all done here. And at the top, he wrote, my divine purpose. And then he went on to explain, this is my mission. My divine purpose is my mission, my grand objective in life, what I'm here to do, the vision for my life. And then pointing to the cross, he said, and this is the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? Just like the Holy Trinity is one God in 3 persons, my one divine purpose is my 3 goals driven up into my divine purpose. Now, I have to obviously pause and explain that Connie is very Catholic, so as you can tell. So I will tell it to you as he told it to me in his words, and then I'll translate it into plain language for the agnostic amongst us. Fair enough? So in these 3 boxes, he explained, are my 3 goals. Goal number 1, goal number 2, goal number 3, and then miscellaneous. And I asked him about this 4th box, this miscellaneous box, and he said, smiling, this is the devil's vortex. Oh, that sounds scary, I said. He says, oh, it is. This is where all the things that you're tempted to do go, think that you should do, that you probably want to do, but it's Satan distracting you from your divine purpose. And then he tapped his finger on this piece of paper and he said, this right here is the great fight of your life. To figure out what goals support your divine purpose, and then staying away from the temptations of everything else. Of course, this is not easy, he said. The temptations of everything else are very compelling and very seductive. Keeping your sacred focus is hard, and it's why most people don't succeed. They fall prey to devil's play, he said. Now, fully hooked, I asked, so what do you do then? How does this work exactly? And then he said, every Sunday evening, I take out a single piece of paper and make what he called my prayer for the week. I write down every single task that I have to do, every project, every phone call, every meeting request that I have to on this single piece of paper. Every task has to go into one of these 4 boxes. It is either a task associated to goal number 1, or it's a task associated to goal number 2, or goal number 3, or it's miscellaneous, which then goes into this lower right box. And then I blurted out, the devil's vortex. And he grinned, seeing that I was getting it. And he continued, if any task or obligation is not in one of the Holy Trinity boxes, it does not go onto my schedule. No exceptions, period, the end. He then quoted a Romans Bible verse that goes, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. He said, you have to separate virtuous work from false work. False work can easily and quickly overcome your schedule. And this is what happened to my son, David, he said, with regret now coming into his voice. He said, David was always really busy, so busy that he ended up with ulcers and he suffered a mild heart attack at age 60. David was in constant meetings. He attended every important function. He networked with every VIP in town. But unknowingly, the work that David was doing was mostly out of this 4th quadrant, the devil's vortex. It was killing him, and it was killing our companies because David wasn't doing the work needed in this Holy Trinity to achieve our divine purpose. See, he really thought he was working hard for the company, and he was. He was just working on the wrong things. And he said, again, I don't blame David. It's easy to get faked out and seduced by all these tasks and demands and not even know that you're not attending to the right things if you don't have a tool to decipher it. And Connie said, this is that tool. Now the fire just blazing in his eyes. So before I disclose the other secrets that Connie gave me that night, let me first tell you how powerful this Sunday paper is and has been for me over the last few years. I just want to be sure that you didn't get lost in Connie's dogmatic version, right, in his religious interpretation. But here's what's so powerful about this as a tool and a process. Number one, it gets everything that you have swimming around in your head onto a single piece of paper. Otherwise, those scattered thoughts have continual pull on your mind and psyche. You're always wondering if you have forgot something. And we know that research shows that this is that process that produces anxiety. So just getting it all down onto a piece of paper eliminates the mental and psychic overwhelm that you feel while you keep thinking of all the things you think you should be doing. Secondly, instead of just writing down your to-dos in one long list, which we all do, or at least I used to do, this Sunday paper requires you to allocate it to each of one of your 3 big goals, or into the miscellaneous section, otherwise known as the devil's vortex. And this provides stark clarity on how you are allocating your priorities. This is so powerful. Never make a single to-do list again. Assign every to-do that you have to one of your 3 big goals or into the miscellaneous section. And when you do this, you will usually come to 2 very disturbing realizations. One, most of your to-dos are falling in the miscellaneous section, what we now know as the devil's vortex. And without this tool, like I used to, this is precisely where you would have spent most of your time that entire week, giving your life force to devilish tasks, let's say, instead of making progress on your divine purpose, not even knowing it. And as the Romans verse said, the only way to overcome evil is to overwhelm it with good. In this case, overcome the temptation of low priority tasks with overwhelming them with good priorities, those that are in your Holy Trinity. It will force you to think more proactively, more creatively, and more strategically about getting some important items in your big three goals, not just those that you have to react to and respond to by other people's requests, which are usually in the miscellaneous section. The second thing you will realize is how one or two of your big three goals is being totally neglected. This realization is often very uncomfortable. For instance, this year I have an impact goal, an income goal, and a marriage goal. Often when I'm doing my Sunday planning and I'm done listing down all my tasks, projects, and meetings for the week, I see that there's nothing in my marriage goal box. Uh-oh. You see, it's easy how we can start to lose sight, right? We start with grand intentions at the beginning of the year, but then it's overcome by the pull of other seemingly more urgent tasks. So this weekly visual provides you with the revelation and forces you to continue to make all three goals a priority and make sure that you're coming up with some contributions to move each one of the goals forward each week. Cool, right? So this instrument is one of the key tools that helped me 5x my income and impact over the last 4 years. The greatest battle we face is prioritizing our productive focus. It is really easy to do this incorrectly, even if you think that you're doing it right, as Conrad's son David did. Look, y'all know the time management practices of the 80-20 rule and don't major in minors and only spend major time on major activities, and those things that matter the least should not get in the way of those things that matter the most, etc. The problem is figuring out in this swirl of demands and meeting requests and invites and continual proposals, new and interesting opportunities, how to prioritize them. So this tool, like nothing else I've ever tried or used, brings that all into clear, sharp focus. And as you know, clarity is power. Clarity is what gives you mental and emotional peace and then confidence. It allows you to take all your energy and keep it focused on a single direction without the pull of emotional or psychological distraction. I mean, think about the unwavering confidence that you could feel walking into your week, knowing exactly what to focus on without the mental worry and pull of what else you think you could or should be doing, and no longer experiencing the emotional anguish of having set your intentions for the week only to see them get derailed and sidetracked, then ultimately leaving you frustrated and regretful once again at the end of the week. Look, I know, because that's exactly how I used to feel, right? This tool that I just shared with you that I've been using for the last 4 years cleared all that up for me. Now there are 3 other huge secrets, at least I didn't know them at the time, but utilizing them after I met Conrad have become, I think, the big tricks that have helped me do and create these extraordinary results. So I want to share those few with you. These are the things that helped me execute on the plans that I would create every Sunday that ended up on that piece of paper each week. So let me touch on them briefly. You can learn a lot more about the actual execution of these strategies inside the Insane Productivity Training course, which goes a lot deeper into these, and then many other key strategies. These are just a couple of few that are passed over quickly because it's packed and dense with key new behavior creating strategies. So have no fear. I'll tell you how you can get access to that here in a bit, but just know that it's one of the benefits of being on this broadcast with me right now. All right, pull that PDF that I sent you back out, and I'm gonna help you fill in the boxes of those 3 big secrets. Ready? Okay, let me take a sip of water here. All right, so here is secret number 1. Conrad called this his sacred demand, and he explained it by quoting Luke, which goes, "For everyone to whom much is given, of him much will be required, and from whom much has been entrusted, even more will be demanded." And Conrad said, That is a sacred demand. Luke says it clearly. It is demanded of me to apply all that I have been entrusted with to the biggest goals I possibly can imagine, to honor my gifts. He went on to say, look, you can use your life and talents to do little things or big things. And to those who have been given much, to apply it to little things is a sin against your Creator, he said. You've heard me talk about this before in different language. I put it this way: the size of your life will be determined by the size of the problems you choose to solve. You can build a house, or you can try to colonize Mars like Elon Musk. You can open up a local coffee house, or you can build a Starbucks network all over the globe like Howard Schultz. You can launch an e-commerce store or an eBay site, or you can launch Amazon like Jeff Bezos. You can open up a bike shop, or you can start an airline, both in the transportation business, right? Like Richard Branson. The funny thing is, or I guess not so funny, is the bike shop guy is probably more stressed out, working longer hours than Branson does. And he might even be smarter and more talented than Branson. Branson just answered his sacred demand to go after bigger goals, to tackle bigger problems than the bike shop guy did. That's the difference. So secret number one is to go after big goals. It takes the same amount of time, same amount of energy, but the rewards and impact are exponentially greater. And after all, it's your sacred demand. If you are here living in these absolutely miraculous times and you live in a free society, so much has been given to you, and thus much is expected of you. Do not sin against your Creator. Honor your gifts. All right, secret number two. Write this down. Conrad called this whole heart devotion. And he explained it, of course, with a Bible verse, this time from Matthew, which goes, "No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other." You might have heard me talk about the billionaire I know who gets up every day and the only thing he does is one thing. Now you know that that's Conrad. It's true, he only does one thing every day. Now let me disclose, it is a really big thing, but only one thing. And if that one thing takes 2 hours, his day's done. If it takes 12 hours, he works on it for 12 hours, but only one thing each day, never two. For as he said, no man can serve two masters. To Conrad, this means two priorities. He said, it's amazing the miracles you can create each day if you give one master, one priority, whole heart devotion. Now, just for clarity's sakes, he does have a 15-minute huddle with his secretary. He does call her a secretary. You got to remember, he is 94 years old after all. He does have a 15-minute huddle with his secretary for 15 minutes every single day to make decisions and check on his vital metrics. But he says it's forbidden for it to take longer than 15 minutes. If it does, this is a sign to me that I am giving poor leadership, that too much is being filtered up to me. This empowers the leadership throughout the organization that they know they are allowed and responsible for making decisions, which is also another great lesson for us. Now, here's how brilliantly all this ties together. The Sunday paper that I showed you gets everything out of your head. It identifies everything in the devil's vortex. It makes sure that all three of your big goals are allocated to, and your priorities for the week are big enough to be worthy of your sacred demand. And all this filters out all the needless activities that would have fractured your time, attention, and energy. And now you can clearly see the few things that matter the most. Then, all Conrad does is simply pick one a day, and he gives it single-minded, undistracted, fully focused, and whole heart devotion to it. There is massive power in that kind of focus. It's insane. So here's the third secret that Conrad shared with me. He called this Genesis deadlines. He said, look, God created heaven and earth in 6 days, I think, to set an example. He said he was showing us all that could be achieved in only a week. If he created all of creation in 6 days, what should we expect of ourselves? A lot more, he said. He went on to say, that is what and why I always set unreasonable deadlines. Every forecast pro forma and projection timeline that I'm sent, I cut the deadline in half, often by 3/4. I tell my staff, we're going to have to move heaven and earth to get it done. And he says, see, this pressure requires us to focus even more, to step up, to grow, to be better than we've ever been. And guess what? By some miracle, we always do. It's quite incredible. But we wouldn't have if we hadn't shortened the deadline of the goal. He went on to say, if God had given himself 1 billion years to create all of heaven and earth, it probably would have taken that long. But he only gave himself a week, and that's how long it took. We too have that kind of creative power, but we don't apply enough pressure on our talents and creative power to realize it. So this success tip that Conrad talked about is consistent with the mindset of many super achievers that I've met, interviewed, and spent time with. They all have this same devotion to creating unreasonable deadlines. Not because they're unreasonable, but because it forces them and their team and the people around them to rise to the challenge. As you know, the late Steve Jobs was accused of having a reality distortion field. It seemed he was able to bend time and achieve seemingly impossible things in seemingly impossible timelines. It was precisely because of this applied pressure that these quantum leaps in outcome and results were made possible.